Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Carpe Diem Conversations. I'm your host, Megan Griffin, Bay Path University senior undergraduate student and editor of the Network News Student Magazine. The Carpe Diem Conversations will be released within our online magazine and will focus on topics that are being discussed nationally each month. This month is Black History Month. This is a time to celebrate the accomplishments of the Black community, acknowledge the racial inequalities in our nation, and look towards what we hope for the future. Today, I have with me two amazing Bay Path students, traditional undergraduate student Janell Smith and graduate student Aprell May. I'm honored to have these inspiring women join me as they are willing to offer their insight into being a Black woman in America. Before we jump into the conversation, I'd like to have each of you introduce yourselves, your connection to Bay Path, and promote any upcoming events you're involved in. So I'll go to Janell first. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, Janell?
Sure thing. Thank you for that introduction. So hi, my name is Janell Smith. I'm currently a sophomore here at Bay Path University, and I'm also the president of the Black Student Union here at Bay Path. One of the exciting events that we have coming up during Black History Month is a poetry jam that we will be holding towards the end of the month on February 26th. And it's going to be virtual, and it'll be a way for students to come together and have a space where they can share their art, which we're hoping will be reflective of Black history and the previous year that we've had.
Hi, I'm Aprell May, and I am a MFA student. I'm in my last semester, so I'll be graduating in May 2021. I have a couple of things coming up. So MFA, we're going to have a reading for our thesis, and my piece is going to be called Classic Fly. So I am working with the Springfield Library and Museums to reimagine Native American Hall, which will also be exhibiting in the spring.
Amazing. Thank you both for just giving us a little glimpse into all the amazing contributions that you make to the Bay Path community and beyond each day. So first, I would be remiss to not mention our most recent national holiday, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Him and Rosa Parks are often seen as the symbols of the civil rights movement in the United States, but there are many unsung heroes of this historic period. So could either of you provide us some more context on Black women's role in the civil rights movement, and also compare and contrast to Black women's role in the Black Lives Matter movement that we're currently experiencing?
For me, one of the few living civil rights era women who stand out, one would be Angela Davis, and the second would be not spoken about, Ramona Africa. She was a part of the movement, and they specifically were, attacked by the police, and the community was bombed. She lived through it. Everyone in the house died except for her and one child. She told her story, and just being able to be a living example is what inspires me. And she's still alive today. She's still in her same area, which I believe is Philadelphia. And she just inspires me to keep moving on and to tell our stories. For most recent political figures, even in the Black Lives Matter protests that I've been to, I've noticed that there are a lot of young adults, young women of color who are organizing these large protests. One in particular, and she's not known to anyone, but she goes to my church. Her name is Angela Rivero, and she organized a large protest in Northampton, and she is 14 years old. And I am just amazed by her. She was on the news, and I can't tell her how proud I am of her for standing up for right.
I definitely want to just quickly touch base on that last piece that you talked about, actually, because I had the opportunity to attend the protest that she had organized this past summer. And it was just one of the very first stepping stones in order for me to get like a true glimpse of what was going on in my community. And one of the biggest motivators for me to like finally get back and get involved, because I was like, okay, if she's doing this at 14, what are the resources that I need for myself and for my own city? And like, how can I get involved and what can I do to give back? So I honestly did not know that she was 14. So that's honestly so amazing. Like props to her. And I definitely think that some people that should be talked about a little bit more are the true founders of the national Black Lives Matter movement. I've definitely done a little bit more research on them. So Alicia Garza, Patrice Cullors, and Opal Tomedy, those are like the three women that are behind the national movement. And all of them have dealt with police brutality in some way, shape, or form, whether it was close to them with a family member or losing someone in their community. And just seeing them have resilience, even going through something so heartbreaking and still wanting to advocate for their own communities. Um, it's just really inspiring, and especially considering the year that we've had where the Black Lives Matter movement has gotten praise, but it's also gotten slander and been dragged through the mud by several people, and just seeing them keep that resilience and seeing them keep the faith no matter what, and advocating for their own communities and advocating for change throughout the country. We definitely have seen that it has had a positive impact in such a short amount of time.
Thank you both for your reflections on that question. And I'm amazed by all the young people, especially the 14-year-old woman you mentioned, that are just organizing these protests, organizing all of these groups that are social justice groups. It's just so amazing to know that that's happening in our local community. So, in addition to the civil rights movement, the feminist movement was also ramping up around the same time as the original civil rights movement. Can you offer up any reflections on Black women's part in the feminist movement from yourself or family members who lived through that time?
In the past year and from year to 2 years ago, I've kind of been unlearning and relearning the concepts of feminism that I have been taught and shown to myself, and moving more towards a sense of intersectionality. And what does that look like for the country? And what does that look like for my community? Because as a whole, we do know that women struggle, but women of color have a different struggle in this country than white women of color. So, what does that look like? And what does that mean for advocating for these groups of women? Because I believe that everyone should definitely be feminists because it's important. We have to advocate for these rights and advocate for equality amongst all of us. But we also have to look at it in the sense of looking at equity, because some of these communities just do not have the necessary resources that they need in order to be as successful as, say, white women. So, what is it that we have to do? And what is it that we have to look for in order to fully uphold and support these groups of women?
I want to say for me, um, I've also had to relearn what feminism meant. My mother and my grandmothers were definitely a huge part of that, um, making sure that I knew that there was a space for me in society. And my mom still does that to this day. Um, she always taught me to fight for your rights, to understand what your rights were, um, and and figure out how you're going to demand those rights. And she always told me to get bees with honey. So advocating has to be the same thing. I think that taking what she's taught me and then just the love in my heart from my daughter is what really is helping me advocate for Black women and people of color and women in general, because it's a different kind of love and care that women have um, for our rights. And so if we can keep that love and that care principle and just apply it to every kind of advocating situation. And I think that we could uplift each other. I definitely like the quote from Mary Church Tyrell, which, it's an interesting fact as well. We always hear about crabs in a bucket, crabs in a bucket. And we never hear about positive Black women who, even back then, was lifting as they climb. And that was Mary Church Tyrell's refrain. So because they stifled that and didn't have that kind of representation in the media, we didn't know that kind of level of love and nurturance existed. So just acknowledging that and just bringing that kind of same care and that same duty to the advocation of women's rights and Black women's rights and people of color rights, I think that that is what inspires me the most.
Thank you so much for your reflections on that question as well. And April, you speak about, your mother and your grandmother kind of educating you on feminism and teaching you different things. Speaking of that, in the actual education system, did either of you feel yourself represented or underrepresented? And if so, in what ways? This could come in the form of textbooks, extracurriculars, administrators, and teachers, anything you encountered within the education system in our nation, really.
Absolutely. I always make a joke because I am a MFA major, which essentially is English reading and writing and research. And I failed English throughout my whole entire high school year. I also failed African American history. Why? Because there was not any representation. I would take their book, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, and Macbeth, and I would push Sapphire in the middle, and I would be reading that instead. Or I would put Sister Soldier in the middle of the book and be reading that instead. And so I was in my own literature head. I was not, I read those books, yeah, but none of those grasped my attention. So when I came back to school to be a writer, I was like, I need to make books for people like me, you know? And then when I started researching, I said, Zora Neale Hurston, I said, Langston Hughes and the Niggerati Manor and Robert Nugent. How come I never read this stuff? This is literature at its finest. LBGTQ movement is in that literature. And unfortunately, they had one publication, just one. The greatness of those people, the greatness of that one book. I rented that library book for the whole summer. They almost charged me for it. And I always talk about we don't see a lot of representation. I didn't really see representation of people like me until I got to Bay Path as professors. And unfortunately, although I'm a Black woman, I'm a biracial woman, and I still don't see people like me, and I still don't see courses towards me. I still don't see those things. And, not to say that Bay Path hasn't been making progress towards it, because I have joined some panels, and they asked me my honest opinion, and I think, and I expressed the same thing, like literature is not there, writing is not there, interest is not there when you don't see people like you. Um, and I want to say sometimes the trust is not there. When you're talking about things that are important to women and women of color and indigenous women, you're being taught by a white man or a white woman about those things, and they have to correct your paper, and you're like, no, that's not right though. So those things have been a certain burden to me. I remember in women's psychology, she told me I wasn't being supportive enough, and that was at Bay Path. So I've had chances to express those grievances. So, and I go back to the word acknowledgement. By just them acknowledging that things are happening, asking, hey, what's going on? I think that that's like the first step. And I think the next step would be to right those wrongs and to heal those wrongs. And you do that again with care and love and honesty. And I think that that's the biggest reason why I didn't feel supported. And honestly, if you look at my high school transcript, where I was like one of the lowest GPAs, the lowest six actually, and then you look at my GPA now, I'm a 4.0 better. You see the difference between reading what I want to read. I'm doing the work on what I feel connected with, as opposed to reading what they're forcing me and being like sausage facing, like in what true education can do.
I definitely agree so heavily with so much of what you shared. I think one thing that just like resonated heavily with me, because I definitely noticed it a lot more since I have started my college career, is just that like the American school system does not do a great job of like telling us the full story. They just kind of tell us like the baseline to keep everyone happy, and like if we acknowledge it, that's fine enough. But I didn't realize that. Um, and I want to say, like, coming from a very diverse high school, we would oftentimes, more towards like the second half of high school, like, we were having these conversations, but again, just like kind of just scratching the surface because people were asking these questions. And having come to college now, really just getting like doing my own research and learning more about the history that is America, and like what has happened before now. Is just like really crazy to think that our education system doesn't do a better job of like truly showing us what has happened. And a lot of these things were not like too long ago. I think we're just like in that mindset of those thinking that like things that have happened were like hundreds and hundreds of years ago, when it was like not too far ago. Like that could have been our lifetime. It's kind of crazy to think that.
If I could just add on, absolutely. If we think about it, it was right then. My mom can tell us stories. My grandmother can tell us stories. We can go to anybody. And I mean, Breonna Taylor, we're living through it. We're
Mhm.
living witnesses. So what my plan is when I came to Bay Path is teach in a different way. So hopefully at the end of this all, I will be teaching the class I always wanted to be in.
Yeah.
And with literature, I've always wanted to read, with the topics I always wanted to talk about. I find that when you have a support system, you're more likely to succeed.
Hmm. I agree with you on that, especially if you have educators that are being supportive of your goals and just like genuinely believe in you. I mean, I'm thankful that I went to a high school where, um, I had staff where there was women of color, and a lot of their stories like oftentimes would resonate with me. But I do know that's not the case everywhere. And I don't know, I was having such a great conversations with one of my friends yesterday actually about like the your comment just made me think of the school to prison pipeline, which is such a big problem that I have become so passionate about over the years, because it's like I can see these type of things happening in our schools, and a lot of times these people just get brushed to the side, but it's just because they're not getting the support that they truly need. And it's like, let's look at this on a deeper level, and like let's actually try to get to the root of this problem to help our students.
Right. So, and just to add more on there, I didn't really realize that there was a problem until I had my daughter. That's when I seen the difference between educators sometimes when she was the cute kid in class and she always had the cute stuff. So everybody would run to her. She would run over all those teachers. As soon as she had someone who looked like her mother or someone who was was her same skin tone, she calmed right down. And I was like, wait, what happened? And as she progressed through school, we've had situations where she just had arch nemesis for teachers. And one teacher in Forest Park Middle School called them pathetic, her whole class. And was really interesting because I was like, because we don't live in Granby or something, or because you think that, I'm not sure what you think. This is the school detention pipeline because everybody got detention and nothing happened to the professor who was verbally abusing my child, my daughter, my beautiful daughter. And so once I started recognizing these things, I started seeking out schools that had more diversity, more inclusion, because I realized that these teachers coming from different rural areas had no clue what children were dealing with, specifically the ethnic children, because, you know, the perspective was just all wrong. So representation, and it's representation throughout the whole entire school. It's not just books, it's not just literature, it's not just writing, it's not just being able to speak about what you want, but it's not just the principals or all of it, it's the teachers too. So I think that once we take a really good look at diversity and inclusion, I think that that's when we'll start to succeed more.
Wow. So, I mean, definitely what I heard from both of you was, there's those books there that you wish you could have read. There's those movies you wish you could have seen, those teachers you wish you could have had, but you didn't have them. And so for a lot of people that really can alter their life. And I think it's amazing that, both of you have been able to find places in your education that have been beneficial, but there's a lot of people that haven't. So thank you so much for that and your thoughts and sharing the experiences of your daughter and yourselves through the education system. So similarly to the education system, the media can have such a big impact on our lives without us even noticing. So just like my last question, did you feel yourself represented in the media or underrepresented in the media? And if so, in what ways, in TV shows, music, advertisements, books, any ways you can think of?
For me, because I'm biracial and I'm part Native American, I've seen nothing. Unfortunately, there's still not a lot of representation. It's the token Indian, the token savage daughter, and there's no representation. And it's partly because there's not a written culture. It's an oral culture. So right now it's like a renaissance of art and writing and things like that. But particularly, I was singled out of all communities because, being in the Black community, you're mixed with something, you know, and a lot of times, and the same with the white community, and a lot of times, even now to this day, when I say African American and Native American, they're like, "Now, don't say that. Just say that you're Black," or "No, just don't say that. Just don't say that," or like, "Oh, you're exotic or something," and think that biracial women of color, there are certain archetypes that we see in the media. And because I write, of course, I searched out these archetypes. And there's the mammy and there's the mulatto, which I guess I would be. There's the counterpart, there's the dandy, and all these archetype characters. And even now, still looking at media, we see these archetypes. We can look at Martin, we can look at Fresh Prince, we can look at, any of the popular shows that I even grew up watching, you can still see this archetype some way or another. I think that that's damaging, and we need to revisualize ourselves. And I'm partly working on things like that. That's basically what my whole writing career is going to be, is revisiting these images and taking back these images and making sure that we reclaim the past and we reclaim the future. Um, Super important for our girls to see. And we I think that also we've seen so many strong women. We've seen so many strong women of color before. We know, like Rosa Parks, we know what she did, right? And so those are our blueprints. And we need to take those blueprints, we need to build from there because that's our stepping stone. They got to step one, we need to be at step two, our kids will be at step three. So I think it's like an upward ascension when we come at it from a perspective of, okay, we started this, we're going to keep it going. And then that's when we get the 14-year-old who's out here doing protests and putting her life on the line for what's right. So I think that that's majorly important, but also ethnic news. I think that, ethnic news conversations like this, the Juneteenth celebration, just bringing awareness and acknowledging that there were women before us and that we are the women of today and that there's going to be women after us. So I think that making sure that we tell our stories, being storytellers is super important to me because our stories matter, our stories count. And those are the stories that our children, like those are the shoulders our children are going to stand on. So making sure that we know that and that um, we're taking every single moment and making it count because our kids are going to see it and that's what they're going to teach their kids. So that's a part of reclaiming and that's a part of resilience.
I honestly think you put that so beautifully. If I were to add anything to that, I definitely think one thing that I've definitely seen with like, especially with like women around my age, is definitely reclaiming our narrative. I've definitely seen a lot of people take their platforms and, kind of spin things on its head and put it into a more positive light, which is, like you said, a lot of times without realizing it, medias tend to put us under these type of these stereotypes, and it can be really damaging. So seeing people detach themselves from that, reworking it, and now presenting themselves and those other groups of people in a positive light. And it's really good for the younger generation because then they get to see those things and they're like, wow, like I can really do that. I definitely think one of the most recent things that I have seen that has just been like so heartwarming has been like videos of young women of color, especially Black girls, just like watching the videos of the inauguration this past week and just seeing that, like, like that can be me. Like, I could be Amanda, I could be Kamala. And it's heartwarming because, like, growing up, even though I'm only 19, like, I wasn't seeing those types of things and I wasn't seeing women of colors hold space like that. And while it is a huge step, there is still so much work that has to be done, and it does not end there. And I just think that we are definitely making positive strides in the right direction. But there's still so much work and um, so many layers that we have to peel back on and continuously just revise over the years because um, like this has just been things that have been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years now. You can't just undo that in 1 year or 2 years. Like this is consistent work that has to be put in as a whole for us to see like true, genuine change down the line.
Wow. Thank you both so much for your previous answers. Amazing to see how far we come, but like you both said, there's so much more work to do. Before we go, I'd like each of you to use a few words to describe the meaning of our recent inauguration of our first female vice president and first vice president of color.
For me, so I'll start, of course, with a story. One day when President Obama was elected, I was a hairstylist, and I owned a business when I was very young. And he was a young white male. He came in, and I used to, give him some braids, and he would love it. And even though he would get in those braids, he's like, "Who did you vote for?" And I'm like, "Well, who did you vote for?" Right? And so he's like, "President Obama." And I was like, okay, great. And he's like, I would never see a woman in office. And I was like, wow, I wonder if he thought because I was Black, that was appropriate. No, because I think he forgot that I was a woman. Right. And so I always tell people that my Blackness doesn't trump my womanhood and my womanhood doesn't trump my Blackness. They're all parts of me. So seeing these women of color, of course, they got the backlash, right? She's got that crime bill that she did, and she's a DA, and all these guys, no matter what race or color or creed they're from, they are like, oh no. And I'm like, why are these women celebrating? And I'm like, because she's the first Madam VP president and she's a woman, So I think that super important for me to see her hold that space, not just because she's a woman of color, but because she's a woman. And I think that that is the change that we need. Um, I, I, I love to see picture of Michelle and Madam Vice President in each other's support, and love, and I think that's one of the biggest things that we didn't see in our community growing up is that support and love, not specifically in the home, but specifically in the media. I think that now that we have the internet at the edge of our fingers, we can kind of capture those moments and really share those moments that are really important to us. And then those images are shared all over the world. And I made a post the other day that is how I feel on Bay Path campus every day when I work with women such as yourself, such as Janine. I just feel that kind of support from you guys, and it just makes me want to be better. So I think that that's what it really means for me. It's the images, it's the space that they hold, it's the titles that they have, and it's really important.
Definitely agree with everything that you said once again. I definitely think that um, seeing her get officially sworn into office was one of those like breaking the glass ceiling type of moments, especially because as women, and especially as women of color, like we get told so much throughout the duration of our life that like certain spaces are just not meant for us. And because we don't see people like us holding those type of spaces, and because we just get told that constantly, like we get used to hearing it, and then we think, oh, like maybe they're right, like maybe we're not meant to hold spaces like that. And I just remember when I watched her get sworn in, like I was moved to tears just because over the past 4 years, starting my sophomore year in high school, that's when I really got into political advocacy work and getting involved in the community and things like that, and seeing everything on more of the behind the scenes element, and seeing like having these conversations with local politicians and hearing what they have to say, and like coming back from DC and things like that. Wednesday kind of just felt like a breath of fresh air for the first time in 4 years. And it just made me really happy because, like not that I would run for office or anything like that, but just seeing someone like me holding such a high position in this country meant a lot, because I don't think my younger self would have ever, I don't think I would have ever been able to imagine that. So being able to see that now as a college student, it's just really great. And hopefully down the line we will be able to have a female president, and that would be amazing if she was a woman of color. And I think that we are definitely breaking these boundaries, and like you said, creating those stepping stones for future generations to feel comfortable to go after these spaces and have them confidently hold these spaces and not feel like whatever the outside world says about them or whatever negativity tries to tear them down, like they won't get discouraged in any way, shape, or form.
Well, Janelle, I know you say you won't run for office, but if you ever did, I would vote for you. Definitely. So Janelle and Aprell, I can't thank you enough for being a part of the very first Carpe Diem Conversations. I am just so grateful for your wisdom, your inspiring words, and just your drive for a better future in both of your fields and both of your careers. and, in higher education. So thank you again. And until next time, Carpe Diem.
Thank you for having me, and Carpe Diem.
Thank you so much for having us.